The Starborn Tournament was unlike any other event in the galaxy. Held once every century, it brought together species from every corner of the universe, all seeking one thing: the title of Supreme Champion. The tournament was a brutal series of trials, designed to test strength, intelligence, and courage. It was a spectacle that attracted millions of viewers from different worlds. This year, however, the competition held an unusual twist. The winner of the tournament would not only claim the title of Supreme Champion, but also the right to choose any being as their prize, someone who would serve them and bring glory to their victory. Solara Rin, a Drakari warrior known for her fierce combat skills, was a natural choice as the tournament favorite. Tall and strong, with the sharpest reflexes of her kind, she had dominated every challenge thrown at her, effortlessly defeating opponents from species far more powerful than the Drakari themselves. Her reputation as an unbeatable fighter was legendary, and many had already begun speculating about whom she would choose as her prize. Most expected her to select another Drakari, someone who could enhance her standing and secure her power among the warrior elite. But no one anticipated what came next. When the final match ended, and Solara stood victorious, her eyes scanned the audience with a calm but determined gaze. The silence in the arena was palpable as the thousands of spectators waited for her to announce her choice. The moments seemed to stretch on forever. With one swift motion, Solara turned toward the human delegation, sitting on the far side of the arena. Dax Holden, a young diplomat from Earth who had been sent to observe the tournament, felt his heart skip a beat as the fierce warrior's gaze locked onto his. Solara Rin, the Supreme Champion, had chosen him, Dax Holden, an unarmed and inexperienced diplomat, as her prize. The announcement sent waves of shock through the crowd. Dax's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, unsure of how to react. How could this be? A human, a species not known for its fighting prowess, had never been chosen before, let alone by someone of Solara's reputation. It was unheard of. Dax, who had no combat experience and little understanding of the galactic politics at play, had only come to the tournament to represent Earth in a diplomatic capacity. He had never expected to be a part of the spectacle. Yet there he was, being thrust into the center of a galaxy-spanning event with everyone's eyes on him. As Dax made his way toward the stage, the whispers of the crowd grew louder. Some questioned Solara's judgment, others speculated on her motives. Dax could feel the weight of their curiosity pressing down on him. When he finally reached the center of the arena, Solara's tall, imposing figure loomed before him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Dax realize this moment was much more significant than any of them understood. He was no longer just a diplomat. He was a symbol of something greater, something that had yet to be revealed. "Are you sure about this?" Dax asked, his voice trembling slightly as he stood before the champion. Solara's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I am. This choice may seem strange to others, but I believe it is the only way to secure the future of both our worlds." Dax furrowed his brow, not understanding. What could he, a human diplomat, offer a mighty warrior like Solara? Why had she chosen him? Before he could ask any more questions, Solara gestured for him to follow her, leading him off the stage and into the shadows of the arena. As they walked, Dax felt a strange mix of confusion and fear. What did this mean for him? For Earth? For the galaxy? He had only just arrived in this vast, dangerous galaxy, and now, in a single moment, his life had changed forever. The people of the galaxy would soon learn that the true reason behind Solara's choice was far more complicated than anyone could have predicted. And as Dax followed her into the unknown, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. Dax Holden had always been a man of words, not weapons. As a diplomat, he was trained in the art of negotiation, not combat. But now, standing by Solara Rin's side in the grand halls of the Drakari Palace, he felt like an outsider in a galaxy full of warriors. The tall, polished walls of the palace loomed over him, decorated with ancient symbols and trophies of past victories. Every part of this world was designed to remind him that he was not meant to be here. As the human prize of the tournament, he was out of his depth. Solara had led him into the heart of the palace, where the Dracari leaders waited. They had all gathered to hear about her decision, but Dax had no idea what to expect. He hadn't been prepared for the kind of attention he was receiving. Whispers filled the air as the Dracari Council eyed him with curiosity. Some looked at him with disdain, others with amusement. But all of them were waiting for Solara to explain her choice. Dax felt a lump in his throat. The council had expected her to select a Dracari, one of their own kind. Instead, she had chosen him, a mere human. It didn't make sense. What could he, a diplomat with no military experience, possibly bring to the table that would justify this decision? Solara stood tall, her presence commanding attention. She motioned for Dax to step forward, and he did, albeit with hesitation. "This is Dax Holden," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "He is my prize. But there is more to this decision than the tournament's rules. He has a role to play that no one else can fulfill." The Dracari Council exchanged puzzled glances. Dax could sense their skepticism. One of them, a high-ranking officer named Tarek, spoke up. "A human? What makes you think he is worthy of such an honor?" "Solara." Solara turned to face Tarek. "I believe he is the key to something much bigger, something our people are not equipped to deal with alone." Dax's curiosity grew, but so did his anxiety. What was she talking about? Why did she think he could be the key to solving anything? He was just a diplomat, not a soldier. He glanced at Solara, searching for an explanation, but she offered none. "I'm not sure I understand," Dax said, his voice tentative. "What do you mean by the key? I don't have any combat training. I don't even know what's happening here." Solara's gaze softened, but her tone remained resolute. "The Ashkari," she said, her voice low and filled with an edge of concern. "They are an ancient enemy, one that has resurfaced in the shadows. The Dracari, for all our strength, have not been able to uncover their plans. But your people, the humans, have something we do not, an ability to think outside the box, to see things from a different perspective. You may be the only one who can help us." The mention of the Ashkari struck Dax like a bolt of lightning. He had heard of them. Of course, stories of a ruthless race of beings that had nearly destroyed entire civilizations centuries ago. They were known for their stealth, their cunning, and their ability to destroy from the shadows. No one had heard from them in ages, and the Dracari believed them to be a myth. But Solara's words made it clear that they were not. They were real, and they were a threat once again. Dax's mind raced as he tried to process what he was hearing. Was it possible that a human diplomat, with no knowledge of warfare or battle tactics, could really help in such a dire situation? Solara believed it, but Dax was still skeptical. He had no desire to be thrown into a galactic war. He had only come to this planet to maintain peace, not to become entangled in a battle for survival. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Dax said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm not a fighter. I don't know anything about war." Solara placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but reassuring. "That's exactly why you're the right person. The Ashkari have hidden themselves in the shadows. Their plans are intricate and devious. You think in ways we cannot, and it is that ability that we need." Dax swallowed hard, his heart pounding. The room fell silent as the Dracari Council awaited his response. Dax looked at Solara, then back at the council, and realized that his life had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was a crucial part of something much larger, and the stakes had never been higher. "I'll help you," Dax said, his voice steady despite the fear rising within him. "But I'll need your trust, Solara, and I'll need all the information you have." Solara nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "You have my trust, Dax, and we will give you everything you need. Together, we will uncover the truth about the Ashkari." As Dax followed her out of the council hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would take him farther than he could ever imagine. The galaxy was at war, and he was right at the center of it. The days following Dax Holden's appointment as Solara Wren's chosen ally felt like a blur. He had never imagined his life would take such an unexpected turn. One moment, he was a simple diplomat trying to foster peace between planets. The next, he found himself on a strange world, in the heart of a galactic war that he had no experience in. Despite his fears, he knew there was no turning back. The Ashkari threat was real, and the galaxy's survival might very well rest on his shoulders. Solara had wasted no time in introducing him to the Drakari War Council. They were unlike any group of leaders Dax had ever encountered. They were cold, calculating, and fiercely loyal to their people. Each of them had their own agenda, but they all seemed to agree on one thing. Dax Holden was their last hope against the Ashkari. As he sat in the dimly lit war room, Dax couldn't help but feel a sense of discomfort. His fingers drummed nervously on the table in front of him, and his mind raced with questions. How could a human like him be the one to stop an enemy as powerful and elusive as the Ashkari? He had no military experience, no combat skills, no weapons. He had only his knowledge of diplomacy, his ability to negotiate and think critically. But would that be enough? Solara, sensing his anxiety, leaned in closer and spoke quietly. "I know this is overwhelming, Dax, but I chose you for a reason. You think differently from the rest of us. That's the advantage we need." Dax met her gaze, still unsure of how his skills could help. "But I'm not a strategist. I don't know how to track an enemy who hides in the shadows. All I have is words." Solara's expression softened, though her eyes remained sharp with determination. "Words are powerful, Dax. The Ashkari are a shadowy enemy, but their plans are not invulnerable. They leave traces, patterns. You'll help us find them." The Drakari Council had gathered around a large holographic map of the galaxy. The image was filled with bright stars, each representing a planet or system, connected by thin lines that showed trade routes, military movements, and recent communications. Solara pointed to a cluster of systems in the outer rim. "This is where we've lost contact. The Ashkari have infiltrated these areas, using their stealth to disrupt communication and spread chaos. We need someone who can find the missing pieces." Dax studied the map, his mind working quickly. The Ashkari were known for their ability to hide in plain sight, to manipulate situations without being detected. But just like any adversary, they left a trail. Dax thought back to his training in diplomacy, where the smallest of details often held the key to understanding the bigger picture. He had learned to read people, to notice the subtle shifts in behavior or patterns that others missed. Perhaps he could use that same skill to track the Ashkari's movements. "Can you give me any more information?" Dax asked, looking up at Solara. "Any reports, messages, anything that might show what they're up to?" Solara nodded. "We've intercepted several encrypted messages, but they're designed to confuse and mislead us. They use codes that are nearly impossible to crack. However, I believe you might see something the Drakari warriors cannot." The words "codes" and "encrypted messages" sparked an idea in Dax's mind. While the Drakari were focused on brute strength and direct confrontation, humans were known for their ingenuity, particularly when it came to technology and intelligence. Dax had access to the most advanced systems back on Earth, and he knew how to analyze complex data. Maybe, just maybe, this was the key he needed. With a deep breath, Dax stood and moved toward a nearby console, eager to put his skills to the test. Solara and the council watched him, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and expectation. He began to sift through the encrypted messages, scanning them for any irregularities. The codes were complex, but Dax was used to cracking puzzles. Slowly, he started to notice patterns, small, subtle clues that seemed to stand out against the noise of the rest. These messages, Dax muttered to himself, they're not just random. They're trying to hide something. Look here. He pointed to a sequence of symbols, a part of the code that seemed out of place. This doesn't match the rest of the encryption. It's like a signature. Someone's trying to leave us a trail. Solara leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screen. You're saying they want us to find this? Dax nodded. It's a risk. But whoever sent these messages might be trying to tell us something. The room fell silent as the realization set in. The Ashkari, the most feared enemies in the galaxy, weren't as invincible as they seem. As Dax set his eyes on the next step in the investigation, he couldn't help but wonder, what else was the Ashkari hiding? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Dax Holden had thrown himself into the investigation, poring over the encrypted messages and the data they had managed to uncover. His initial success in identifying the hidden trail left by the Ashkari had only deepened his determination. The more he learned, the more he realized how intricate the Ashkari's plans were. They were not simply hiding in the shadows. They were manipulating the galaxy's key players, sowing chaos, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Solara Rin had become his closest ally, guiding him through the Drakari war councils and helping him navigate the dangerous waters of galactic politics. She had given him full access to the Drakari intelligence network, a treasure trove of information about the Ashkari's previous activities. But it was clear that even the Drakari didn't understand the full scope of the threat. Despite their military strength and technology, the Ashkari's subtlety and deception made them nearly impossible to track. One evening, as Dax sat in a quiet corner of the palace, poring over a map of the galaxy and connecting dots no one had thought to connect before, he was interrupted by Solara. She stood in the doorway, her expression serious but not without a hint of admiration. Dax, she said, her voice steady. We found something. Dax looked up from the screen, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. What is it? We've pinpointed a location, Solara replied. One of the Ashkari's hidden bases. It's not far from here, but it's been carefully concealed. Dax's heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. For weeks, the Drakari had scoured the outer rim of the galaxy, looking for any sign of the Ashkari's activity. But it wasn't until Dax's analysis of the encrypted messages that they had finally tracked the enemy down. He had used his knowledge of patterns and human technology to uncover the location of the Ashkari's base, hidden in plain sight, disguised within a cloud of asteroids. What's the plan? Dax asked, already preparing himself for what was to come. We need to move quickly, Solara replied. If the Ashkari know we found their base, they will move their operations again. We can't let them slip away. Dax nodded, feeling a growing sense of urgency. For the first time since being chosen as Solara's prize, he felt like he was truly part of something important. This wasn't about him being a symbol or a mere diplomat anymore. He had a role to play, and the galaxy's fate was hanging in the balance. The Drakari fleet assembled, sleek ships gliding through space with a precision only warriors could manage. Dax was nervous, though he tried not to show it. He wasn't a soldier, and he had never been in battle. But Solara had promised him that his role was crucial, not in fighting, but in guiding them to the heart of the Ashkari operation. As they neared the asteroid field, Dax's mind raced. The Ashkari were masters of subterfuge, and there was no telling what kind of traps or defenses awaited them. He couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The Drakari trusted him, but he still had doubts about his abilities. Stay close, Solara said, her voice calm yet commanding. She had become a rock of stability for him, her presence reassuring despite the danger surrounding them. We'll navigate through the asteroids. The Ashkari's base is well hidden, but with your help, we'll find it. Dax glanced at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The asteroid field ahead looked like a maze, an endless sea of rock and dust, but he had learned to read the subtle patterns the Ashkari had left behind. They weren't perfect. They had made mistakes, and Dax had been trained to find those mistakes. As the fleet advanced, "There," he shouted, pointing toward a cluster of asteroids. "There's something there, a faint energy signature." Solara turned sharply, her expression hardening. "That's it. Prepare for the next phase." The fleet moved swiftly, but cautiously. Dax felt a knot tighten in his stomach as the ships drew closer. This was it. They had found the Ashkari's hidden base, but what would they find inside? Was it a trap? And if so, would they be able to escape in time? As they closed in on the asteroid's surface, Dax took a deep breath. He wasn't sure he was ready for what awaited them, but he had come too far to turn back now. The galaxy's survival rested on his shoulders, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Solara's voice broke through the tension. "We're almost there. Stay sharp, Dax. We may be walking into the heart of the storm." Dax nodded, his heart racing. This wasn't just about a battle. It was about stopping an enemy that had been lurking in the shadows for centuries. The Ashkari had made their move, and now it was time for the galaxy to fight back. The Drakari fleet moved quietly through the asteroid field, the hum of their engines the only sound breaking the eerie silence of space. Dax Holden sat tensely in the command ship alongside Solara Rin, his fingers gripping the armrest as they approached the Ashkari base. The base, hidden deep within the maze of asteroids, was cloaked by advanced technology designed to keep it from being detected. But now, thanks to Dax's insight, they had found it. Solara's voice broke the silence, calm yet filled with determination. "Stay alert. The Ashkari are masters of deception, and we're walking into the unknown. We don't know how many of them are inside, or what defenses they have, but we can't afford to hesitate." Dax nodded, his eyes scanning the screens, watching for any sign of movement. The space around them was dense with rock and debris, making navigation tricky, but the fleet moved like a well-oiled machine, the Drakari pilots confident in their abilities. Dax had never seen such precision in action before. These were warriors, each focused on the mission with a single-mindedness that sent a chill down his spine. They were ready to face whatever came next. The closer they got, the more Dax could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had always believed in the power of diplomacy, but now, faced with the possibility of an all-out battle, he had to remind himself of the skills that had brought him here. He wasn't a soldier, but he had been chosen because of his ability to see things others couldn't. He had found the Ashkari. Now it was time to stop them. As they reached the outer perimeter of the base, the fleet slowed. The asteroid field had thinned out, but the base was still well hidden. It was a vast complex, built into the heart of an asteroid, with energy shields protecting its surface. Dax could only imagine what secrets lay inside. "Ready yourself, Dax," Solara said. "We're going in." The words hung in the air for a moment before the fleet engaged its cloaking technology. The ships shimmered, blending into the background of the asteroid field, just another shadow among the countless others. But Dax felt his heart racing faster with each passing second. They were close now, too close for comfort. Suddenly, a burst of energy shot out from the base. It was powerful, but erratic, like the Ashkari have detected something, or someone, coming their way. Dax's eyes widened as the energy signature flickered across the sensors. "They know we're here," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Solara's expression tightened. "Not good. They've activated their defenses. Get ready for anything." The fleet moved forward, but Dax knew they couldn't wait too long. The Ashkari might have detected their presence, but they still didn't know exactly where the fleet was. The next moments would be crucial. If they made it to the base undetected, they would have a chance. But if the Ashkari were able to rally their forces, it could be over before they even landed. Suddenly, a loud crackle came through the comm system. "Captain Rin," a voice called out, one of the Drakari officers. "We're reading something strange. There's a distortion in the energy field surrounding the base." Dax's heart skipped a beat. A distortion? What do you mean? It's like the base is trying to hide itself even further, the officer replied. The shield isn't just blocking us from entering, it's masking its presence altogether. Impossible, Dax muttered. The Ashkari had always been masters of stealth, but to create a distortion of this magnitude, it was beyond what he had expected. He could feel the tension rising in the cockpit. Solera didn't hesitate. Full speed ahead. We can't let them buy themselves more time. The fleet surged forward, weapons charging, shields activating. Dax's grip tightened as he watched the display in front of him. They were close now, too close to turn back. If they didn't break through this distortion, they would be sitting ducks, exposed and vulnerable to the Ashkari's counterattack. Just as the distortion seemed about to swallow them whole, a burst of energy from the fleet's main cannon collided with the shield. The energy pulse rippled across the surface of the asteroid, and for a moment, everything went still. Then, like a dam breaking, the shield shattered, and the base revealed itself in full view. Solera turned to him, her voice steady. We've made it this far. Now, we finish this. Dax nodded, the weight of his responsibility settling into place. He wasn't a soldier, but in this moment, it didn't matter. He was a part of something larger now, a force that could change the course of history. Together, they would confront the Ashkari and bring an end to their reign of terror. With a deep breath, Dax stood, preparing himself for the mission ahead. The enemy was close, but they were ready. It was time to see if the human mind could truly outwit the shadows. The base was silent, too silent for comfort. As Dax Holden stepped off the ship and onto the rocky ground of the Ashkari's hidden fortress, a chill ran through him. He had expected to feel the weight of the unknown, but now that he was here, it was more intense than he could have imagined. The air was thick with tension, and every step he took seemed to echo in the empty corridors that stretched out before him. Solera Rin led the way, her eyes sharp as she scanned every corner, every shadow. The Drakari soldiers followed, their presence a reminder of the sheer firepower at their disposal. But Dax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Stay close, Solera said, her voice low but firm. The Ashkari are masters of deception. We don't know what we'll find in there. Dax nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that settled deep in his chest. They had made it this far, but the real challenge was still ahead. They needed to find the heart of the Ashkari's operations, whatever they were planning, and stop it before it was too late. They moved through the narrow corridors, their footsteps muffled by the strange, metallic material of the walls. The lights flickered above them, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Dax couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing in around him. The Ashkari were silent, their traps set, and their plans unfolding in the darkness. But they hadn't anticipated Dax, someone who could see through their lies, who could read between the lines and find the patterns that no one else could. As they reached the central chamber of the base, Dax's heart began to race. The walls around them were lined with advanced technology, screens blinking with data that he couldn't yet decipher. He had expected to find a hidden laboratory or weapon storage. But what lay before him was something much more chilling. The room was filled with holographic displays, each one showing different parts of the galaxy, highlighting key locations and planets. But what caught Dax's attention were the strange symbols scattered across the screens, symbols he didn't recognize. Solera, look at this, Dax said, pointing to one of the displays. The symbols seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. Solera approached, her face hardening as she examined the symbols. These are Ashkari codes, but I've never seen anything like this. It's almost as if they're mapping out something larger than we anticipated. Dax frowned, his mind racing. The Ashkari weren't just hiding in the shadows. They were preparing for something. But what? And why were they using this strange, encrypted language? Captain, one of the Drakari soldiers spoke up, breaking the silence. There's something deeper in the base. A locked door. It's heavily guarded, and we can't get through without proper access. Dax, I need you, Solara said, her eyes locking onto his. You're the key to this. Your ability to see things others can't. It's the only way we'll get through. Dax nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had never considered himself a hero, but now, in the heart of the enemy's lair, he realized just how crucial this role had become. The fate of the galaxy rested on their success, and there was no turning back now. He stepped forward, walking toward the locked door, his mind racing as he studied the intricate patterns of the Ashkari security systems. It was unlike anything he had seen before, but there was something familiar about it. A subtle flaw, a miscalculation in the design that was just waiting to be exploited. With a few swift commands on his console, Dax began to decode the Ashkari encryption. It wasn't easy, but with each line of code he cracked, the door began to hum, and the lock clicked open. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The air was thick with the smell of machinery, and the sound of distant humming filled the space. Dax stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight before him. In the center of the room stood a massive, glowing device, surrounded by rows of alien technology. It pulsed with energy, its power core radiating an eerie blue light. The Ashkari had been working on something massive, something that could change the course of the war. This is it, Dax said, his voice barely a whisper. This is what they've been building. Solara moved forward, her expression unreadable as she studied the device. It's a weapon, but not like anything we've ever seen before. Solara turned to Dax. As he worked, Dax couldn't help but think about the strange symbols he had seen earlier. The Ashkari were planning something far beyond just a weapon. What if this was just the beginning? What if the galaxy was on the verge of something far worse? The weight of the unknown pressed in on him, but one thing was certain: he couldn't stop now. Not when the fate of the galaxy depended on him. Dax's hands moved quickly over the console, his fingers dancing across the glowing buttons, but the pressure in his chest only tightened with every passing second. The massive humming device at the center of the room was still alive, its blue energy core pulsing with terrifying power. Every beep from the console echoed like a countdown in his ears. They were running out of time. Behind him, Solara Rin was speaking into her communicator, giving orders to the Drakari soldiers outside. I want a full perimeter. No one is getting in or out. We can't afford to be caught off guard now. Dax barely heard her. His eyes were locked on the readouts flashing across the screen. The Ashkari had been meticulous in their design, each layer of security more intricate than the last. But Dax had been trained to think differently, to approach problems from angles others didn't see. He had to stay focused. He had to crack the code. This wasn't just about disabling a weapon. It was about saving the entire galaxy from falling into the hands of the Ashkari. The Drakari engineer, Kale, stood beside him, his face a mask of concentration. The energy signature is spiking, he warned, his voice filled with urgency. If we don't shut it down in the next 5 minutes, it will be too late. 5 minutes, Dax repeated, his voice barely a whisper. We don't have 5 minutes. Solara, who had finished her communication, came over to join them. Her eyes swept over the console, then locked onto the device. The glow from the core reflected off her face, casting strange shadows. This isn't just a weapon, she said, her voice low but steady. This is the key to something much bigger. Dax didn't understand. He didn't have time to understand. He needed to focus. His fingers flew faster over the controls, trying to unlock the remaining layers of encryption. The machine before him was built for destruction, but it also had a strange, almost unnatural precision about it. It was unlike any weapon he had ever seen. The Ashkari's technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. This was their greatest creation, and it was moments away from being activated. Come on, Dax muttered to himself. His pulse was pounding in his ears. He had to stop it. He couldn't let the Ashkari launch whatever they had planned. Just as he was about to enter the final code, The lights in the room flickered. A loud crash echoed down the hallway. Dax froze. His heart leaked into his throat. The Drakari soldiers were still outside, but the Ashkari had discovered them. Solara's voice cut through the tension. "We have incoming. Dax, we need to move. Now." He hesitated. The countdown was reaching its final seconds, but he couldn't leave the device in this state. If he didn't disable it now, it would be too late. He glanced over at Kale. "Can you finish it?" Kale nodded sharply, his face pale but determined. "I'll handle it. You need to get to the soldiers." Dax didn't need to be told twice. Without another word, he turned and ran toward the entrance of the chamber. As he burst through the door, he could hear the sounds of distant blaster fire. The Drakari soldiers were already engaged in combat. The Ashkari were here. Solara was already in the midst of the chaos, her weapon drawn, barking orders to her troops. "Hold the line," she shouted. "We cannot let them breach the main control room." Dax gripped his own blaster, his heart racing. He had never been in the heat of battle like this before. Back on Earth, his work was diplomatic, talking, negotiating, finding a peaceful resolution. But this was different. This was war. And right now, there was no room for peace. The corridor was narrow, and the sound of gunfire filled the air. Dax pressed his back against the wall, taking a deep breath. He peeked around the corner, and the sight that met him nearly made his stomach drop. Ashkari soldiers, their faces hidden behind sleek armor, were closing in. But Dax noticed something different, something strange. "They're headed for the control room," Dax realized aloud, his mind racing. "They want to stop us from disabling the weapon." He rounded the corner just in time to see the Ashkari forces converge on the entrance. Dax's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't going to make it. But then, a familiar face appeared. Kale, his eyes wide with panic. "The system's almost down," Kale yelled over the noise. "Just hold them off for a few more seconds." Dax's eyes locked onto the Ashkari soldiers, their weapons trained on the door. His pulse raced, but there was no turning back now. He didn't know if they'd win this fight, but one thing was certain. He was going to make sure the Ashkari never got their hands on the weapon. Not while he still had breath in his body. With a burst of adrenaline, Dax dove into the fray, his blaster firing in rapid succession. The battle for the galaxy was on. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of gunfire, shouting orders, and the clashing of forces. Dax's pulse raced as he ducked behind a large pillar for cover, his blaster still smoking from the recent shots he'd fired. His mind was sharp, but his body was starting to feel the strain. The Ashkari soldiers were relentless, moving with eerie precision, as if they knew exactly where to strike. But Dax wasn't alone. Solara Rin was by his side, her every move calculated and deadly. She had been fighting for hours, but her determination was unshakable. "They're getting too close," Dax muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. His fingers tightened around his blaster as he peeked out from behind the pillar, watching the Ashkari forces closing in on the control room. Solara nodded grimly. "We can't let them take it back. We'll hold them off until Cal disables the weapon." Dax swallowed hard. It felt like time was moving in slow motion, each second stretching longer than the last. The energy in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. The Ashkari knew they were about to lose control of the weapon, and they were desperate to stop them at all costs. "Stay low," Solara ordered, and Dax quickly ducked back down as blaster fire shot past them. It was getting closer. They were running out of space to maneuver, and the walls of the corridor felt as though they were closing in on him. Still, Dax's mind was sharp, thinking several steps ahead, calculating their next moves. "Get to the west hallway," Solara said, her voice low and urgent. "It's our only chance to flank them." Dax nodded and sprinted toward the west hallway, his boots pounding the floor as he rounded the corner. Behind him, the sound of blaster fire intensified, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The Ashkari were right behind them, closing in, but Dax and Solara had made it to the hall first. They took position, weapons raised, waiting. Seconds later, the first Ashkari soldier turned the corner. He was taken by surprise, falling back with a single shot from Dax's blaster. Solara took the lead, moving forward with deadly precision. The rest of the Ashkari squad was close behind, but they didn't stand a chance. Dax and Solara had the upper hand. They moved fast, cutting through the enemy ranks with swift, efficient strikes. As Dax moved through the hallway, he kept an eye on the time ticking away in his mind. Kale was still working, trying to disable the Ashkari weapon before they had a chance to turn it back on. Every second felt like an eternity. "We're almost there," Dax said, catching his breath as another Ashkari soldier fell. "Just keep them off us for a little longer." Solara gave him a quick, tight smile. "You just focus on keeping us alive. I've got the rest." Dax could see the edge of the control room ahead, the door barely visible at the end of the hall. His heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. Solara moved with him, both of them darting in and out of cover, picking off any Ashkari soldiers foolish enough to approach. The sound of blaster shots reverberated around the narrow hallway, and the tension was thick. The Ashkari weren't just trying to win a battle, they were trying to prevent a catastrophe. But Dax and Solara couldn't let that happen. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the floor beneath their feet. Dax stumbled but caught himself just in time. The walls cracked, sending dust and debris into the air. A warning alarm blared in the distance, signaling that the countdown had reached critical. Kel was close. They didn't have much longer. "We need to move now," Solara shouted, grabbing Dax's arm and pulling him toward the door. The blast had distracted the Ashkari, buying them a few precious moments. "Kale, how much longer?" Solara demanded, her voice tight with urgency. Kal's voice faltered, his eyes scanning the console, his hands trembling. "I can't stop it. It's too complicated. I need more time." Dax glanced over his shoulder. The Ashkari soldiers were advancing, their weapons raised. They were closing in. The countdown was nearly complete. The tension was unbearable. Dax's mind raced as he thought quickly. There had to be something they could do. The room was full of advanced technology, but they couldn't afford to keep fighting. A deep rumble filled the room as the energy core flickered. For a split second, it seemed like everything had stopped. Then, the glow from the core began to dim. The countdown ceased, and the room fell silent. The weapon was deactivated. Dax's chest heaved as he looked around, taking in the scope of what had just happened. The Ashkari had been stopped. The galaxy had been saved. But the cost was far from over. "We did it," Solara said, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she spoke, the weight of the victory didn't quite settle. There was still more to do, more battles to fight. For now, though, they had won. The silence that followed the deactivation of the weapon was almost deafening. Dax stood in the center of the control room, still gripping his blaster, eyes scanning the dimmed energy core. The countdown had stopped. The Ashkari had been thwarted, their plans for galactic destruction crushed in the final moments. But the victory felt empty, like the calm before a storm. Behind him, Solara Rin was already at work, sending commands to the Drakari soldiers outside to secure the area. "Lock down the perimeter. We don't know how many more Ashkari are in the area," she ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. Dax barely heard her. His mind was still racing, replaying the battle over and over again in his head. He had been thrown into a war he never expected, never wanted, but now it seemed as though nothing would ever be the same. His fingers tightened around the grip of his weapon, and he exhaled a slow breath, trying to calm himself. "You did good," Solara said, stepping up beside him. Her voice was softer now, more reflective. "You held the line, even when the odds were stacked against us." Dax nodded but didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. This war, this struggle, was so much more than he ever anticipated. He had come here to negotiate peace, to find a solution where everyone could coexist. Instead, he had found a galaxy on the brink of destruction and had to become something else, a soldier, a fighter, someone who could survive when it seemed impossible. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his eyes still on the control panel. "A few hours," Solera replied, looking at the readouts on her own console. "Once the reinforcements arrive, we'll be able to extract the data we need to track down the remaining Ashkari factions. But for now, we need to figure out what happens next." Dax turned to her, the weight of the situation finally hitting him. The war was far from over, and their small victory was just a temporary reprieve. "And what happens next?" he asked, his voice low. Solera met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something other than a fierce warrior in her eyes. He saw a woman who had lived through too many battles, too many losses. She gave a small, sad smile. "We keep going. We keep fighting until it's finished." It was a heavy answer, but Dax understood. They had both been thrust into this war, and now it was their responsibility to see it through. No one else could do it for them. The stakes were too high. The Ashkari were too dangerous. As the hours passed, Dax and Solara worked side by side, coordinating with the Drakari forces to ensure the remaining Ashkari were neutralized. Each mission they completed, each soldier they saved, was another step forward, another move toward a future where the galaxy could finally know peace. But the scars of this battle would not fade quickly. They had witnessed too much, been through too much to simply forget. By the time the first transport ships arrived to carry the data back to their allies, the atmosphere inside the facility had changed. The weight of the fight was still there, but there was also a sense of accomplishment, of having won the first battle in a long, drawn-out war. Dax stood beside Solara as they watched the ships lift off, heading toward their next destination. There was still so much to do, but for the first time since all of this began, Dax felt a small spark of hope. "There's still a lot of work ahead of us," Dax said, his voice steady. Solara nodded. "I know, but we're in this together now, and we'll see it through." Dax didn't have the words to express what he was feeling: relief, exhaustion, determination. But he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a diplomat, no longer just a man with a peaceful heart. The galaxy had forced him to become something more, something stronger. And whatever came next, he was ready to face it head-on. As they walked out of the control room together, their mission wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like they had a chance at winning. Together, they would face whatever came next, no matter how difficult the road ahead. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for something greater. The hope of a better future. The hope of peace. And maybe, just maybe, this time, they could make it happen. The sun rose over the horizon of the distant planet, its golden rays casting a warm light over the rocky landscape. It was a new day, one filled with the promise of change. The battle had been hard, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something greater. Dax stood on the edge of the landing platform, his gaze focused on the ships departing the planet, carrying the hope of a united galaxy with them. The mission was complete, but the real work was just starting. Behind him, Solara Rin stood quietly, her hands clasped behind her back. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a determination that reflected everything she had been through and everything she was fighting for. Dax had seen that strength countless times throughout their journey, but today it felt different. Today, it felt like the first real victory in a long, hard war. "You're quiet," Solara said softly, her voice breaking the silence between them. Dax turned, meeting her steady gaze. "Just thinking. We've come so far, Solara. But there's still so much to do." Solara nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. "There always will be. The galaxy's a big place, and change takes time. But we've made a difference. Today, we've stopped the Ashkari, and tomorrow, we start the long road toward rebuilding." Dax let out a slow breath, the weight of it all pressing down on him. The Ashkari threat had been destroyed, but peace was never as simple as defeating a single enemy. The galaxy was fractured, torn apart by centuries of war and distrust. It would take more than just soldiers and blasters to heal the wounds. It would take diplomacy, understanding, and most importantly, time. "We'll rebuild," Dax said, his voice steady now. "But we can't do it alone. The alliances we've formed, the bonds we've created, they're the key. If we stand together, we can start to heal the galaxy." Solaris smiled, a rare, soft smile that warmed Dax's heart. "Exactly. And we'll make sure the Ashkari never rise again." The sounds of ships preparing for departure filled the air, their engines humming as they began to ascend into the sky. The Drakari forces had secured the area, and now it was time for them to leave. For now, the war was over, but Dax knew better than anyone that this was only a brief pause. There were still remnants of the Ashkari forces scattered across the galaxy, and their influence could not be underestimated. But the winds of change had started to blow. It wasn't just about stopping an enemy anymore. It was about building a future. The past was full of scars, full of pain and loss, but the future could be different. Dax had seen that firsthand. He had been a part of something bigger than himself. He had helped save not just a planet, but the future of millions. "You've done more than just fight, Dax," Solaris said, her voice quieter now. "You've brought us hope. You've shown that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward. That's something no one can ever take from us." Dax felt a sense of pride swell in his chest at her words. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was a symbol of something greater, a symbol of resilience, of hope. He had fought for peace, not just with his words, but with his actions, and in the end, that was what had mattered most. "We'll keep fighting," Dax said, his voice filled with conviction. "For peace, for a better future." Solara glanced toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn touched the distant mountains. "We will, together." As the ships vanished into the distance, Dax and Solara stood side by side, looking out at the vast, endless sky. The battle was over, but the war for peace was far from finished. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But they were ready for it. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. The galaxy had its scars, its wounds, but it also had hope. And hope, Dax knew, was something worth fighting for.